So you found the skeleton. How would you tell people that it's you personally? How would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right. Hey, everybody. So this is the Leaving Young Earth Creationism stream that I'm doing in memory of Bill Ludlow, who, in case you hadn't heard, passed away very recently of cancer. Later on in the stream, I'm going to give some information on if you would like to attend his public service, which will be held at the Arizona Museum of Natural History in Mesa, Arizona. So if you're in the area, it's open to the public, so you go, be respectful. I also want to lay down a quick ground rule. Some of you may or may not know that Bill Ludlow and some other members of the community had some disagreements recently in the last few months. And we're not going to talk about that today because that's not what today is about. Today is about celebrating Bill Ludlow's work as an educator and scientist. And that's it. So I'm instructing my mods. If anyone wants to talk about any of the recent conflicts that Bill was involved with any other members of the YouTube community, you can get a warning, and then I want them timed out, and then I want them muted. That's it. This is strictly about Bill's work as an educator and scientist. And so to honor that, I figured I would continue the work that he had started, talking to people about how they left Young Earth Creationism. And because I was scheduled to be one of those people, I figured we would just do that interview with Kevin here, who goes by DeadKennedyInSpace on YouTube.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you coming on. I think it's important to help continue that work because it was a really big passion for Bill, and it's one that I share. Bill was actually a pretty big inspiration for me to just start doing stuff on YouTube. So, yeah.
Absolutely. It's I have to say it's huge shoes to fill, but I will do my best.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, no one can really replace Bill and his knowledge about human evolution and his work in Permian paleontology with ichnofossils. It's a big loss.
Extremely. You will be missed.
Yes, and someone said the museum staff will definitely miss him.
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah, he was really good there. The one time I met him in person, we spoke a few times online, but the one time I met him in person was at that museum.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I met him in person. Kent Hovind in the chat, he was there. It was an open museum day or something, and he was there. Normally, he was there with his Human Origins display, but that day he was there showing off his recent finds of fossil trackways from the Permian in Arizona.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
He discovered the largest Permian trackway ever discovered, as far as I know, in the world.
I see Ben Hovind saying he didn't know who he was at the time.
Yeah. He hadn't listened to his debate with Kent Hovind, which is the debate that kind of inspired me. Like, I'm going to do something like that. Yeah, so, and if you haven't seen, my debate has recently had an audio update and went up as a new video. So, that's up there. That debate was directly inspired in part by Bill Ludlow, and in part by people like Ben Hovind saying things like, you should go debate Kent, just do it. And eventually I got sick of him saying it, so I did it. That's the other part of that debate.
Right.
But we're here to talk about me having been a Young Earth Creationist and leaving. So, why don't you give us a jumping off point for that, Kevin?
Absolutely. So, I guess the obvious starting point is how did you get into Young Earth Creationism? Was it kind of family oriented? You were born into it, or was it something you discovered later on in life?
So, as far as home life goes, there wasn't really a whole lot of discussion about things like the age of the Earth or origins or evolution. But the church that we went to, that was more frequently a topic of discussion there. So we went to a non-denominational evangelical Protestant church, which in the United States almost always means either old Earth creationism in a anti-evolutionary sense or young Earth creationism. So that was really what started it, and I know various family members, as far as adults go, were into it to various degrees. So I grew up with both my parents and my mother's mother, my grandmother on my mother's side. And my grandmother on my mother's side was Catholic, and since basically she was a girl, their stance had just been like, it's fine, just evolution, old Earth, whatever, that's okay. So she never really had anything to say about that. And my mother was definitely more on the young Earth creationism side than my father was. I remember once, I think as an adult, asking him about it specifically, and him saying, I don't really know much about it, but yeah, maybe things evolved. However, my mom once found me reading Origin of the Species, and it was kind of like she found me reading like an adult magazine or something. It was, but yeah, it was most of the education happened in church, and I remember the church library having some creationist books. Like I think they had the Genesis Flood, Scientific Creationism, maybe a few more. And those are kind of like the classics of young Earth creationism. Those were the books that really started flood geology and young Earth and what was then called scientific creationism that we now mostly call young Earth creationism.
Okay. Were you really big into it once you were into it?
I kind of was. So I was always someone who really liked things like science and things like that. Like I like to read books about astronomy and dinosaurs and things. But at the same time, a lot of the authority figures, especially in my church, were saying, well, these ideas about the universe being, billions of years old and the Earth being 4 billion years and dinosaurs living hundreds of millions of years ago. That's not really true. Here's a book that will really explain what really happened. And so I said, okay, well, these guys probably know what they're talking about. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in these positions of authority. So
That's interesting. And I, I have to wonder, was there ever any talk of like why was Darwin wrong? Why were these scientists wrong? Or like, because I'm kind of noticing that in order to be a young Earth creationist, you kind of inherently have to be a sort of conspiracy theorist.
to some extent, you do. I think the explanation that was really given the most was simply that uh, the scientific method, either rightly or wrongly, precludes a supernatural explanation. And so they simply couldn't come to a conclusion that involved a creator. So they went with whatever their next best option was. Which I I don't really think that's the case. I could imagine scenarios in which the evidence would actually point towards some kind of powerful being the cause of some agent of some something. Like if it really did look like all life on Earth didn't share a common ancestor, because that's something we can test for. And if that's actually what came back, then I think that most scientists would probably conclude that yeah, life was specially created by something, and many of them would probably privately conclude that it was God. But it would mean that special creation would be the scientific explanation if that's what the evidence indicated. It just isn't. So
Okay.
yeah, I think that was it. It was just I was told that they basically scientists were precluded from thinking that, so they didn't.
Okay. So it wasn't so much a matter of deliberate conspiracy. It was more these people are smart, but they're misguided.
Yeah, I don't think I would have. I'm trying to remember back. I don't think I ever thought of mainstream scientists as being intentionally deceptive. I thought of them more as misguided.
Okay. That's honestly good to know. I would rather that be the case, to be honest.
Yeah,
If I had to choose between one or the other.
and I would say also that that's something that doesn't. It does vary in young Earth creationist circles. I know young Earth creationists who are much more of the conspiratorial mindset that the scientists are all godless heathens trying to drag you away from the Lord. And it's like, well, what about the Christian ones? And it's like, oh, they're only pretend Christians. That does happen, but that wasn't my experience growing up.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, what would you say was kind of the most testing moment then? Like, what were the sort of things that people would bring to you that really kind of, I don't know, gave you pause for thought?
Well, I think so. I probably started actually learning about evolution as a topic in a classroom in high school. And interestingly enough, I actually went to a Catholic high school. Um, Neither of my parents were Catholic, but they sent me to that school primarily because the academic record on things like math and English and stuff like that was significantly higher than the public school, and they could just afford to send me there. It wasn't
Okay.
like it wasn't exactly like, oh yeah, well, this is no big burden. It cost them a lot, and they definitely scrimped to make sure that that happened. Um, but as I said, the Catholic Church doesn't have a problem, at least officially, with evolution. And so the biology classroom, that's what we went over. And so that was the first time I really learned anything more than just the most broad aspects of evolution. And so I decided to research it on my own because before that, I had already learned a lot about taxonomy. And at the time, Linnaean taxonomy was still kind of the big thing with the extra little divisions added in, like superfamilies and infraclasses and subfamilies and stuff like that. So those were all. That was where taxonomy was at the time that I was learning about this stuff. And so even when I was a young Earth creationist, I could tell you, I believe I knew every single order inside Mammalia. I knew most of the families. I knew the binomial nomenclature for most common animals that people knew the name of. But in learning about evolution, I was seeing why there were these patterns that I already knew about, but hadn't really come up with an explanation for. And so it was sort of that previous study of taxonomy as a kid, just because I liked animals and I liked nature, that kind of is what started me into researching evolution on my own.
Okay. So I'm guessing then there was no kind of big aha moment. It was just a matter of piecing a very large pattern together.
Yeah, it really was. There was nothing in particular. It was just that as I went researching online in books and things like that, I was finding that fewer and fewer things that I thought had been ridiculous about theory actually were ridiculous. They all actually fit together pretty well, and there was actually good evidence for them, and that evolution had predicted evidence and things like that. So that was eventually I just realized, well, I don't have any reason not to believe this anymore. It's the most likely explanation for the origin of, biodiversity.
Okay. All right. Now I'm curious because I've spoke with a lot of skeptics who have some degree of faith and a lot who don't, and it's always kind of a controversial subject in the community. Um, and I know a few who are Christian, but essentially say, well, there's no reason science and faith can't work together. Have you kind of come to that mindset that rather than young Earth creationism, it's just evolution is the mechanism through which God works, kind of thing?
So I will say, as a policy, I on this channel I don't actually give what my current theological standpoint is.
Fair enough.
I will say, as I have said before, that leaving Young Earth Creationism, which started with evolution and eventually the Young Earth 2 started, I started looking into that too. But none of that was wasn't ever really a problem for my faith as a whole. It certainly made me lose some trust in certain people who were supposed to have been teachers within that religion. But no, I still think that there's really no reason that religion in general has to conflict with working as a scientist or doing good science or accepting modern science. I do think that some religious interpretations are not going to work. So, for instance, if you want to be the kind of Christian that, say, that church wanted you to be, you couldn't believe in science. But more generally, Christianity doesn't have to conflict with any of that.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. I always kind of wonder how how people of faith deal with the potential conflict of science. I consider it a potential conflict of science because,
Yeah.
like you said, they absolutely can work together. But yeah, I just find it interesting how people tend to process that.
Well,
Um,
at the time, I can say this, and like I said, whether or not this is still my position is not something I'm going to talk about. But
right.
at the time, I basically said, okay, well, if the Bible is right and science is right, but they seem to be conflicting, then I must not be interpreting the Bible correctly. And I also thought to myself, you know, the point of the book, and actually, I don't really like to call it the book because there are a whole bunch of books that go to make up a collection. The Bible is more of a library than a book, but that's off topic.
Hmm.
None of those books was set out to discuss biology or physics or geology or meteorology or astronomy. That's not what any of them are about.
Right.
Pick up any single one of them, and that's not the point of any of them. Some of them are biographies, some of them are histories, some of them are myth, some of them are poetry, some of them are apocalyptic literature. And these are all different genres, but none of them is anything to do with any of those sciences.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can kind of complement that by saying I've done the anti-flat Earth biblical argument before, which is basically the Bible says nothing about the shape of the Earth. It's not really concerned with it.
So, yeah, I agree. It's there are certain passages in the Bible that, if you take them very literally, will lead you to an incorrect conclusion about science. And that can actually
Mhm.
include flat Earth. There are passages in the Bible that, if you take them very literally, make the Earth seem flat. But I don't think that the Bible is there to tell you what shape the Earth is. I don't think it was a concern of any of the authors.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
and some of the authors may have been wrong about it. I'm pretty sure that some of the authors of some of the books in the Bible were in fact flat earthers, which was the prominent idea at the time.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when you finally got away from young Earth creationism, uh, was there any kind of, because it sounds like you obviously weren't from a very strict family on the subject, but was there any kind of conflict in explaining that to them?
So I sort of remained in the closet about it for a long time. Actually, sort of until recently. So my family now knows that I do this channel, and so it's that aspect is no longer something that I don't talk about. It's obviously out in the open because they know about it.
Right.
But I basically, especially around some of my siblings and my mom, was like, nope, not going to talk about it, not going to hint at it. And then when um, certain family members would say something that was obviously implying this kind of special creation mindset, I would just kind of grin and nod and like, yeah, okay, that's okay. And like I said, at one point, uh, my mom found me reading Origin of the Species, which I wanted to read mostly for historical purposes. I mean, I know that the science in there is outdated by 170 years or something like that.
Right.
So it's definitely not the current thinking on biology. But
No.
I was kind of like, this is a new thing for me, and I want to get to the historical origins of it, and what was the original evidence that sparked this idea. And so I picked up that book. And I came up with some excuse like, oh, I think it's important to read books that have influenced society and the world in general, whether or not you agree with them. And I actually do legitimately think that. It's just that wasn't actually the reason I was reading the book.
Right.
So I would encourage people to go read such books. But yeah, that was a lie when I said that, even though I do stand by the sentiment.
Hmm.
So it did cause that. There were also some people in my church who found out, and there were a lot of discussions around it, mostly trying to convince me to go back and become a young Earth creationist, or young Earth creationist again, and especially the creationism part. The old Earth part versus young Earth part seemed to be less important to most people there. It was more that, oh, evolution can't be true. No matter how old the Earth is, evolution can't be it. And the church held things like creationist seminars where they'd have a speaker come, and like I said, there were creationist books in there. And one time they actually, this was before I stopped being a creationist, they decided to try and hold a creation evolution debate, but they lacked anyone who actually accepted evolution. So guess who got to be the devil's advocate evolutionist?
Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
that was me. And it was actually one of the things that started to make me think that maybe I should actually investigate, because I was I was trying to go through in my discussion faunal succession, although I didn't know that that's what it was called at the time. I only had a vague idea about things like how the fossil record worked. But I was talking about fossil worms, I think, under this impression that evolution says we all came from worms, which is not really true, but eh. And so I remember the people who weren't involved in the debate, the audience, started like heckling and yelling, and someone got up and said, "How do you know it's not just a fossil twig?" To which I didn't even respond because it just seemed so dumb to me. Because like I know what a twig looks like and what a worm looks like. I can imagine I could tell the difference between a fossilized one. Like, why would that be hard to do?
Right.
And basically the debate ended up getting shut down because there was too much audience heckling. And I was just thinking to myself, is this really what we're going to do to defend creation, is just yell and scream absurdities?
Mm.
That doesn't, and that's not really fair because, that's not how most of those debates go. But it was something that started me thinking, there's got to be something else going on here. This can't be all there is.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting that you basically had the opportunity to watch the whole scenario from a third person perspective, or
Yeah.
even rather from the second person perspective, really.
Yeah, it was happening to me, and I was normally thinking of, the guy on the evolution side as the enemy, but that time it was me.
Yeah.
And even though I didn't actually hold it, but it's actually not an uncommon thing in formal debates for the people debating either side to not actually, for the side they're debating to not necessarily be the side that they're on.
Hmm.
So in academic debates, that's actually fairly common that you'll be assigned a debate and you won't know which side you're on until the day of the debate.
Interesting. I'm really glad I don't debate professionally and I just debate flat earthers because it's a lot easier.
Well, that's academic debates. Debates that happen between people like you'll see like the flat Earth debates, or even more formal debates, but that are not being done by students. Usually, the debaters are actual proponents of the side they're debating for. It's just the in college thing is to try to prepare people to be able to know either side of an argument so well that when you decide to actually argue for your position, you don't straw man the other position and you actually refute their position.
Right.
Because it really is true that if you want to refute something, it helps to actually know what they're saying. And that's one of the reasons that I think I can do the creationism stuff pretty well, is because having been one, I know what the arguments were. I know why they're convincing, and I know why they're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, you're in the perfect position to do this, actually. Um, okay. So I'm curious because you mentioned it seems with the kind of the core of young Earth creationism, the young Earth isn't as big a deal. A lot of them can accept the old Earth, but the creationism aspect is what they struggle with. That evolution is the big sticking point. Why do you think it is such a big sticking point? Because just from an outside perspective, to me, as an agnostic, I find that really easy to integrate evolution into God's mysterious ways.
I really think it comes down to a couple things. One is the theological position that that death, even animal death, is fundamentally the fault of, or is a result of the fall in Genesis. That has to be a literal true thing in order to make the sort of the fundamentalist soteriology work. If that's not really the cause of death, then how is it that Jesus saving us can save us from death when death was always a part of the world? I do think that there are reasonable Christian responses to that. but none of them are really ones that are likely to be taken seriously, I think, by sort of the evangelical Protestants in America. Mostly because I think most of them come from traditions that they have already dismissed as too far outside what they consider to be authentic Christianity.
Interesting.
I also think that there is some connection with the idea of the Imago Dei, the image of God. That in Genesis, God's said to have made man in his likeness.
Right.
And so I think if man is really an ape, and we're going to take the image of God thing very literally in a sort of physical sense, then the question becomes, why is the infinite, eternal creator of the universe a monkey?
Hmm.
And I think that the answer to that is simply, well, don't have to be overly literal with the Imago Dei. You can think of it as things like humans' ability to think as moral agents and to reason and to plan for the future and to be creative.
Right. Well, what I find odd is if you go further back, um, you're basically saying that God created man in the image of singular cells of minerals
Yeah,
that
yeah, that could be too. Like if man is created through this evolution process, then is God a clump of bacteria? Is he a bunch of rocks? Is he, a bunch of comets raining down with complex chemicals from outer space?
right. In Kent Hovind's word, is he the rock that you pour water on and suddenly it creates life?
Yeah, and I think that stems from being very literal about the idea of the image of God, which
Hmm.
I don't think is really fair because I remember even as a young Earth creationist thinking, well, if God is the person who created all this, then he would have to be independent of it, and so he can't be some old guy on a cloud. He must be something without an inherent, human-like form. And so the image of God thing must be something other than just God looking like a person.
Right.
So,
And kind of related to that, I wanted to ask: is there a compelling kind of reinterpretation of the fall? The whole death is caused by man's failure and everything. Is there is there a case for that being a more metaphorical argument than a literal one?
there are cases, and I don't, like I said, I don't want to go too far into my current uh, theological standpoints, but I would say, oddly enough, a lot of the older writings on the subject from times like the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh centuries actually have, I would say, more nuanced views of such ideas than a lot of modern Christian writing does. So I would say if you want to look into a more nuanced view of things like that, that isn't actually all that incompatible, you might want to look into some of the, they're called church fathers from those centuries. They have uh, some fairly philosophically advanced views on things like that don't simply depend on there having been a literal physical Adam and Eve who ate an actual piece of fruit and then got cast out of a garden. Like these theological ideas don't depend so heavily on that. And because one of the things you have to remember is that this idea of young earth creationism and evangelical Protestantism and fundamentalist Christianity, these are all ideas that are less than a century old. This is not how Christianity was traditionally taught or expressed. And it seems
Mhm.
so prevalent in America today that it just seems like, well, that's just how Christianity was. And no, no, it wasn't.
It almost I hesitate to say this may be too much, but it almost seems a little bit like a cult that came about due to anti-science sentiment early in the days of Darwin and things like that. But I'm not necessarily going to say that's the case, of course.
There were definitely some cult-like aspects to evangelical Protestantism in America. They're not. It varies though. So you get varying degrees of control, varying degrees of thought policing, varying degrees of identity modification, things like that. So I would say that my church was pretty low on most of those things. There was some thought stopping techniques that were used for the evolution question. But overall, it was low on things like changing identity or controlling who you interacted with or what outside sources of information you got. Their inside sources of information were provided, but if you were found to have been, looking at some other website, it wasn't like you were going to be tossed out of the church or anything.
Okay.
So, but that's not the case in every church. There are definitely segments, and this is probably true for most religion. There are definitely segments that are much higher in control and much more like cults.
Hmm.
So I was probably pretty lucky there, in that church really didn't have that problem. Obviously.
Fair enough. All right. Now, I guess kind of the big question that's, it's such a skeptic community question is, there's always going to be those people, young Earth creationists, who are starting to question or think about their beliefs a little more seriously. What's the main things you want to say to them? Like, if you could drive home one point to them, what would it be?
Well, first I'd say the conclusions of science regarding the age of the universe, the Earth, and the origins of biodiversity don't have to conflict with your belief in most creationists in America. It's in Christianity. Those are not necessarily incompatible. You may have to change certain aspects of your theology, but it doesn't have to affect you believing in Jesus or in the Holy Spirit or the Trinity or even the fall. It doesn't have to negate any of these things. And the other thing is, look, scientists aren't just trying to trick you. They're not idiots. They're not missing something obvious. They're really smart people who spend a lot of time working on this and being excoriated in print if they get things wrong.
Mm.
So maybe look at what they're saying from basically from them. Don't just filter it through Christian literature. Actually read the things that the creationist literature are citing. So if they say, oh, hey, Stephen Jay Gould said this, well, go check out that book from the library or download it. Go read it. Because I guarantee you the impression that you're getting from creationist sources is inaccurate.
Mm-hmm. And while we're at it, watch some of Bill's work,
Yes,
because
absolutely.
it's the exact same kind of thing. He can always shed some light on this situation as well.
Yeah,
Sorry,
Bill has some excellent work on this, especially centering around human origins and the evolution of humans from earlier ancestors, basically starting towards the what am I trying to say? The Australopithecus line, all the way up through into various Homo species, various other Australopithecus species. He's got a lot of that stuff, and he was much better at it than I will likely ever be. Because my focus in terms of study has tended much towards Mesozoic archosaurs, and much less towards things like Cenozoic primates.
fair enough.
So,
All right.
yeah, definitely check that out. And like I said, yeah, creationists, professional creationists, they're dishonest. And that was actually one of the tougher things for me to come to terms with. Because eventually I realized they couldn't just be wrong, because they would have had to have read too much to not know that what they were saying couldn't be true.
So then you would say someone like Kent Hovind knows that he's wrong.
Oh, he absolutely knows.
Okay.
Kent Hovind knows that he is wrong. I don't think he knows that everything he says is wrong, but he knows that some of it is. He doesn't care. I think he's probably honest in believing that creationism is true, but he knows that some of his arguments simply are wrong.
Right.
It's been pointed out to him with too much evidence too frequently, and he too often strawmans his opponents in ways that he's been called out for too many times for me to have any realistic notion that he actually believes all of the things he says. He doesn't. Yeah, I think Ken Ham might actually be less honest than Kent, and I think that because I think he's smarter.
Agreed. Yes.
Yeah,
I would say Ken Ham is smarter.
um, I know Jason Lyle. I don't think is honest. He's ast- astronomer or an astrophysicist. Physicist. I'm not sure which one, but it's one of those for Answers in Genesis. Georgia Purdom is a geneticist who works for them. I don't think she's honest either. Um, the people who I do think are honest are the people who aren't the big names. They don't run the big nonprofits. They are the kinds of people who show up at a local church to give a 45-minute talk on a Wednesday night, followed by a potluck dinner. I think those people are honest, and most of them aren't creating original material. They're just recycling material from places like Answers in Genesis or Creation Research Institute or sometimes even Kent Hovind. Although, despite his prominence online, in the actual kind of professional creationist circles, he has fallen out of favor for being even too ridiculous for them. So, Answers in Genesis, for a while, I don't know if they still do, but for a while they published a list of arguments we don't think creationists should use. It was basically to counter Kent Hovind using these arguments. Not all of them, but it was like 50% just a list of things that Kent Hovind liked to say that were so badly wrong that it gave creationists a bad name. Like, I remember one in particular was that a basking shark carcass was actually a plesiosaur. And in the Answers in Genesis article, they pointed out that the carcass that was found didn't have any bones. And even if it looked sort of like it was vaguely shaped like a plesiosaur, plesiosaurs had bones. So this couldn't be a plesiosaur. I was like, yeah, that's correct. That is good fact checking. That's how science works. Good job, AIG. You got one right. Kent, on the other hand, he doesn't say it much anymore, but I've never heard him admit that he was wrong about it. So, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. That's always been the big giveaway with Kent to me is that so many other young Earth creationists say that he's full of nonsense.
Yeah, it really is. And he's been shown in person documentation as to why certain things that he's claimed are wrong, and just continues to go on with it. And it also, another thing I noticed is that I really noticed it, especially in my debate, is that the things that he claims to know about, he doesn't. He knows enough sciencey words to fool people who know even less than him, which is, I mean, most people don't know all that much about, comparative anatomy or cladistics or taxonomy or anything. But I think one of the big giveaways was when he said that if he were presented with a fossil skeleton, he couldn't identify it as either dinosaur or not, despite calling himself Dr. Dino, having a website that's drdino.com. His email is drdino@drdino.com.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, and this isn't doxing him. This is public information. He says it all the time in his...
Of course, yes.
Like, he gives out his phone number online. That's how I set up the debate. I called him. I spoke directly to him. And to be fair, on the phone, he was pretty polite. He wasn't an unpleasant guy to talk to.
He seems like a nice guy. Just very not smart.
He's nice until he turns nasty, which he can do if you're antagonistic enough. If you want to see Kent Hovind turn nasty, watch his discussion with Aaron Ra on the Non Sequitur show.
I was just going to discuss that. He got pretty nasty with Aaron.
Yeah. Aaron is not afraid to be blunt, I guess is probably the nicest way to say it. And he definitely baited Kent to the point where Kent lost it a bit. And I think that there's something to be said for doing that, as well as something to be said for what I did, which was trying to keep it as cordial as possible. I think it's good to have a mix of both of those things whenever you're trying to counter something, because different people will respond to different styles of debate. Some people really do respond to kind of heated back and forth, and other people are a bit more contemplative and will respond more to the kind of debate that I like to have, which is a bit more cordial and ends in a more friendly manner.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's valuable to have both of those.
On a great example of that, I would say Aaron Ra's discussion with Kent followed immediately with Aaron Ra's after-show discussion with G-Man. Completely different dynamic going on there.
Yeah. It was interesting. Although, did you see G-Man won a debate recently?
against Godless Engineer.
Yep.
Yes, I mean, we say won a debate. He didn't prove his arguments. He just did a much better job than
Yeah,
Godless did, and
that's the thing. Well, that's the thing
it
about
was
a debate. You can be right and lose, and you can be wrong and win.
right. Yeah, and there was a point during that debate where Kyle was basically making an argument for slavery, and I just kind of put my hands over my face and
Yeah, but that's pretty off topic, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds there.
fair enough.
I will say it wasn't during my kind of exit from Young Earth Creationism, but it was shortly thereafter that I realized just how dishonest all of the big names in creationism had to be, and it bothered me because these were people who I had been told were supposed to be trustworthy, men of God who were working for salvation of everyone's soul and all this stuff. And I thought to myself, well, can they do it by lying? Is that really going to work? Like, if you have to lie to people to get someone to believe something, maybe you just shouldn't get them to believe it. Maybe no one should believe that.
Right.
And it really bugged me, and it's one of the reasons that I started this channel is because of things like that, where I would read or watch these things by creationists, and I would think to myself, this guy can't actually think that this is true. Like when Georgia Purdom gives a talk about genetics, which oddly enough she doesn't do very often, despite having a PhD in genetics, an actual legitimate PhD from a real school.
Wow.
She still only very rarely talks about genetics. But when she does, she says things like, oh, you can't get new information without ever defining information, and things like that. And I think to myself, there's no way she got through a postgraduate program in genetics and is still able to make these statements truthfully. Because she would have had to have been shown all of the reasons why that is a nonsense statement. Because any way you define information in a way that's measurable, which you would have to do in order to say, we have a decrease in something, you have to be able to measure it first. So any way in which information is measurable in a genome, it's obvious that mutations can cause information to increase in a genome. I mean, any duplication event is an increase in information in the genome. So, yeah, it's...
I have to point out at this point really quickly that it is a true shame that Bill Ludlow is not here right now, because this would be a much more stimulating conversation. I have to say, I'm a little undereducated in these kinds of topics, and if he were here, he would have so much more to say to you. But I love hearing it at the very least.
Well, I think you're doing a pretty good job, and I really do miss that I won't have the opportunity to do this with Bill, which, I mean, it was supposed to be in 6 days, and I really do think that this is the best way that I can honor his memory, is to just continue that work.
Absolutely.
I don't think I can fill his shoes. I certainly don't have the same knowledge base. I certainly can't make the same videos he would have. At the very least, we can have some of the same conversations. And, yeah, I wasn't expecting this. I had talked to him not that long ago, really. I think last month I talked to him, and I know some people who talked to him this month. And as far as I knew, everything was still a go for next Monday. And then I was just browsing Facebook, and I saw a post, and I had to read it 3 times, because every time I read it, I was like, no, that can't be what I think it means. And then, nope, that's what it meant. And it was his son announcing that he was, he had probably days left. And then not long after, the word came through that, yeah, he passed away on the 20th, 2 days ago.
I had a very similar reaction when I saw the news on Twitter, that I had to read it a couple of times and say, no, that's who? Because I was convinced the first 2 times I read it that it was his account speaking about someone else.
Yeah.
And when I realized it wasn't, it hit pretty hard.
Yeah, this and Sidestrike, it's been a rough year for the sort of science education community on YouTube.
It has.
And I guess it just means the rest of us have to step it up. because that's some big losses, and yeah, I mean, I'm gonna do what I can on continuing to counter creationism, anti-evolutionism, young Earth stuff, um, and there's a lot of people who are gonna keep countering things like chemtrail nonsense or flat Earth or all that crazy stuff. And really, my dedication towards the countering creationism really is because I was one, and I feel like I was personally lied to.
Right.
I know that none of the people who were likely lying actually came and lied to my face because I didn't ever meet any of them until my first phone call with Kent, which, by the way, was the day after his debate with Aaron Ra.
Oh wow.
Yeah, because I wrote down his phone number, and I was saying to some of my friends, I was like, "Hey, did you know that Kent Hovind gave out his phone number?" And then I decided to call him because why not? He gave it out.
Yeah.
So I wasn't
Wow.
actually confrontational or anything with him. I was just very friendly. He asked questions like, "Oh, hey, where are you from?" And "Oh, I'm from here." And he said, "Oh, there's a lot of heathens out there." And I said, "Yep, there's a few."
Wow. He like went right into the shtick, eh?
Yeah. I mean, he didn't have a. I didn't really have a good reason for calling in. He didn't sense that I was trying to be antagonistic, which I wasn't.
Right.
And so
I
yeah, we just had a little chat.
I just find that odd that like is that a conversation that really hardcore Christians have with each other frequently? Yeah, there's a lot of heathens out there. That's a
Um, so there is sometimes discussion about sort of the level of the word sometimes is used churching, which is the proportion of people in an area that regularly attend church.
hmm,
So a place that isn't well churched means that there's a lot of the people out there who don't regularly attend church.
okay.
And so it's not an uncommon conversation. It's not usually something that's like you'll sit down and have a nice long talk about this over a meal or something. It's more of a if you're trying to learn about a new part of the country or you're meeting someone from there, you might ask about it. And so,
Okay.
and I think it has to do with so even though a large proportion of the United States identifies as Christian, a fairly small proportion of them identify as the sort of Christian that is going to be a young Earth. They're always a
Right.
minority, definitely as for the country as a whole, but even within Christian circles, they're usually not the majority. And so I think that it sort of helps to be able to talk about to what degree people around you don't tend to agree with you on a certain ideological basis. It's sort of like, if you're particularly on the political left or right and you're living in an area that's predominantly the other way around. So, if you're fairly conservative and you're living in San Francisco, you might talk to other conservatives about how not conservative San Francisco is.
Right.
And that's how I saw it. It was sort of one of those things where it's like, to what degree are we sort of the outgroup?
Okay. That's fair. And I mean, I guess that's something people. It's the Christian version of what everybody does, right? You move to a new town, you want to know where the bad part of town is. Where should I, clutch my things a little more tightly?
Right, yeah. And you also want to know things like, like if you're into a particular kind of music, are there any bars that do live shows with that kind of music or something
Yeah.
like that? Which, by the way, I was not the no alcohol kind of Christian. My family kept a well stocked liquor bar my entire life, or not liquor bar, but just a bar. In what was once a china cabinet, it very quickly became a very well stocked bar. So yeah.
Fair enough.
Although I do remember that there was some concern when I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, because when I started doing that, it was towards the tail end of the sort of Christian scare about Dungeons and Dragons. And
The Satanic Panic era.
yeah, it was towards the end of that, which was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition was the thing then. And yeah, I had to do some some quick research and things like that to make sure that I could assuage any fears from my parents before that happened. And I think I may have been overblown into what degree they were going to be concerned about it. Like, I may have exaggerated that in my own mind. But I knew that people at the church had talked about it. So I made sure to do a whole bunch of, like, oh, here are the reasons why it's totally not an anti-Christian thing to do. Here's a whole list. There you go. So I was always a bit research minded. I guess it's probably obvious at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I have a question that's off topic. That I'd been wondering about this for a while, and I'm gonna hate the answer because I guarantee it's in a video somewhere. I've missed it. I haven't seen it. But I'm gonna take a guess at this. Let me know if I'm wrong.
Okay.
Ceratosaurus?
Yes. Yeah. So
Excellent.
yes. I am a Ceratosaurus. The degree to which my the horns on my avatar kind of stick out is a bit hypothetical. I'm just assuming that
Mhm.
there's significant keratinization of the horns on top of the underlying bone structure, which isn't unreasonable, but it is entirely speculative.
Right.
I am largely based off of a few skeletal reconstructions of specific Ceratosaurus specimens, a few life reconstructions that I looked at to see what other people were doing for the reconstruction, and one sort of composite standardized skeletal reconstruction where they take as much information as they can from actual specimens and try to come up with sort of a standard member of the species.
Okay.
And yeah, so
Interesting.
it's a fairly accurate reconstruction. Some people complain that it looks a little front heavy, and it does look front heavy. But one of the reasons for that is that Ceratosaurus was probably pretty low density towards
Hmm.
the anterior end of the animal, and the tail was definitely very high density compared to the rest of the animal.
Yeah, I was
So,
thinking a lot of theropods tend to be top heavy, do they not?
well, they tend to be so
They just tend to balance themselves out with their stance, right?
the balance, the point, like the point of balance, the center of gravity tends to be in line with the knees at a standing pose, and if you were to assume even density throughout the body, it would actually mean that they would have to tip over. But the majority of a theropod head, neck, and torso is actually air, whereas the tail is almost entirely muscle and bone.
Okay.
So they're much denser in the back than they are in the front.
Interesting. Now I'm curious. I was looking up Ceratosaurus before this, um, and I'm noticing. Am I correct in noticing that the arm size of theropods tended to get smaller as time went on? Because Ceratosaurus is earlier than something like, say, T Rex, right?
It is. So it's a tendency in theropod lines that get big. It's not a tendency in theropod lines that go for small body sizes. So there's this whole group in Silurosauria, which is not very closely aligned with Ceratosaurus, but it's a group to which Tyrannosaurs belong, but it's also the group to which things like Compsognathus and Velociraptor and birds belong.
Right.
And so that's Silurosauria. That's a bigger group. But within that, you get this group called Maniraptora. The Latin means hand snatchers. They snatch things with their hands. And they actually tend to have very prominent forelimbs with big, well-developed grasping hands until you get to birds where those grasping hands start being more and more derived into wings. But this group did not go for short arms. The short arm thing is primarily the result of using the jaws and feet as primary hunting tools.
Right.
Because when you're a small animal going after small prey, it's handy to be able to grasp whatever you're holding onto. But when what you're trying to chomp into is, a juvenile sauropod, grasping isn't really going to help. You need to just bite it to the
Yeah.
point where it's going to die, or it's just going to go away from you because it has the mass to simply physically move itself away.
That's what always has always fascinated me about dinosaurs in general is that they're basically an example of evolution gone wild, just this incredibly long period of time where you could see you can see very basic things about the creatures, like you're saying, like you get these huge jaws because they need to eat sauropods, and you have these smaller snatchers, and just the way things happened over such a long time scale. It gives us a really example of how evolution can have its ups and downs.
Yeah, and also you can even see convergent evolution within different lines of large theropods in the Mesozoic. So in the Cretaceous, we had two different families that were very distantly related to each other, of theropods that both converged to the big head, big legs, tiny arms form. You get the tyrannosaurine tyrannosaurs like Tyrannosaurus and Albertosaurus and Tarbosaurus. And on the other side, in like say South America and parts of Africa and Madagascar, you get the belosaurs, which were actually ceratosauroid. They're actually much more closely related to Ceratosaurus than they are to Tyrannosaurus rex. And they have even tinier arms than T-Rex, and they're even less useful because T-Rex, if you look at his arms, they're fairly small compared to his body, but they're fully formed. They have all the bones you expect.
And they had a lot of crushing power, if I remember
Oh
correctly.
yeah, but the Abelosaur arms were probably immobile anywhere except the shoulder, and the hands pointed back towards the body, so they couldn't actually grasp, even if they could have moved the fingers, which they couldn't.
Wow.
Yeah.
So even less than like even less useful than say like a Carnotaurus's arms.
Well, Carnotaurus is one of these animals. Carnotaurus is an
Oh.
Abelosaur.
Oh, okay.
So it's an example of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
This has been incredibly informative to me.
I try.
See, it would have been less informative if Bill were here, but it would have been a lot more educational for the audience. I'll say that.
Yeah. And really, it's that all those things that I was saying about how we can see convergent evolution between different lines of dinosaurs, with a special creation mindset, you just kind of have to shrug and say, that's just how God made it. It's not really a reason. It's how it is. And that, to me, is sort of it's a disappointingly small perspective on the history of life. There's no symmetry to any of the things that are happening around the world. There's no patterns. You can't look at biogeography and say, why is it that in South America and North America, which were separated at the time, we get these two different groups of very dissimilar animals coming to similar body plans in different ways? And why is it that there are giant salamanders in the United States and in China? Why is it there are alligators in the United States and China? Why is it there's ginkgo in the United States and China? Why is there a connection between these two countries biologically? Whereas on the other hand, there are, the ungulates in, say, Europe and North America are much more similar. Why are there these weird different things? And with creationism, you just kind of have to shrug. Yeah, it's just how it is. But if you look at the history of Earth through the fossil record and evolution, you come to actual reasons. Like all of these things like ginkgo trees and giant salamanders and alligators went across a land bridge during the Mesozoic when these ungulates hadn't evolved. And then they were separated until the Ice Age when these ungulates had evolved and then came in. But because, the animals that were then in China were adapted to, subtropical environments, whereas these European animals were all sort of tundra and Arctic. They were the ones who could get through the land bridge. The other Chinese animals that didn't get through the Mesozoic couldn't because the land bridge was just too cold, too dry. And so that's why we have this weird mix of sort of European-seeming and Chinese-seeming fauna in America. It's because at different times, different groups of animals managed to cross across the Bering Strait. And with creationism, you don't get to have any of that history.
See, I've always thought to myself with agnosticism, whenever I consider the idea of a God, I've always thought, if God is anything, it's got to be the rhythm to the universe. And it sounds like evolution gives a lot more rhythm to the universe than creationism. Creationism just sort of puts things in place and says, because.
It's really sort of the ultimate a wizard did it hand wave, Whereas it's true, evolution has these patterns that repeat. There's various mass extinctions, and then we see the same kinds of niches being filled by different organisms. And then we see another mass extinction, and then there's a new radiation, and there are these biogeography things where we see migrations from one continent to the other by certain animals at different times in geological history. And there's a certain beauty to how we can trace all of these things. And I'm glad that I don't have to miss it, because there's a lot of interesting stories to be told around these little stories. And if you just think that everything was specially created and somehow came from an ark a couple thousand years ago, or I guess 4,000 years ago to be fair, I mean, what? Just had to make up some stupid stories about how kangaroos happened to hop to Australia without leaving any fossils or populations anywhere else. That's just why they're in Australia. There you go. Whereas if you actually have a proper understanding of things like geology and evolution, you can say, okay, well, there's a reason that marsupials primarily occur in South America and Australia, and why the only North American marsupial actually came from South America. It's because South America and Antarctica and Australia were all connected until fairly recently, and because we weren't in an ice age until recently, they were all habitable across that. But then when they broke off, then Australia kept its primarily marsupial inhabitants, but because South America was still close enough for newly evolved placental mammals to raft over, they colonized South America, and that's why you have a mix in South America, but almost exclusively marsupial mammals in Australia, and why the only native placental mammals in Australia are bats. Because bats can fly. They can just get across the ocean. So
Fascinating.
yeah, you get to know all these interesting things about these details. And actually, I have to be right back because there is someone at my door, and
I heard
I'm gonna
that.
check on that. So I'll be right back. Sorry about
No
that.
worries. I'll entertain the audience here.
Okay.
Yeah, Dark Knight Apologetics, Ugly German, and Burnbird. If you guys want to have a discussion about this on my channel, I'm more than happy to set that up. I'm, you know me, I'm a host of discourse, and I see what's going on in the channel, in the chat. It's getting a little heated, but I, I know two of you. I know Dark Knight and Ugly German, and I know you're both good people. So I'd love to see you guys, calmly have a discussion. Tell us about my channel. I'm a flat Earth debunker. I'm not overly interesting. I do space science and conspiracy debunks, mainly flat Earth, sometimes some other things. Kind of moving on from flat Earth more recently because it's dying. People are losing interest in it. But there's lots of other crazy out there. There's mud floods. There's breatharians. Have you heard of breatharians? They think you get food by breathing. Yeah. Interesting, though. A lot of those going for the low-hanging fruit. Yes and no. I mean, come on. Pardon me. It is low-hanging fruit to a degree, but the reason I go after it specifically is because I'm a big fan of space science. I'm very interested in everything that we do outside of Earth's atmosphere. So the idea that none of it exists is frustrating to me. So that's why I go after it specifically. Oh, thank you, Kiri. I don't know. I try to be. But well, yeah, of course. I mean, when would you not want to take a stab at flat earthers, Neslig? But that's what we all do in the skeptic community. We pick the brand of dumb that annoys us the most, and we figure out why it's so silly. And I do go after it knowing I won't change their beliefs. The idea to me is there are people out there who are on the fence about this, who are saying, I don't know what the shape of the earth is. I don't know if evolution is true. So I think this community is a great is a great thing for people who are asking those questions to find the answers. And so that's why I do what I do. People who are on the fence about the shape of the earth, I hope to shift them onto the globe side.
And I hope that that's what I do too. That's one of the reasons I'm trying to be a fairly friendly place for even for creationists. And it's because, I was in those shoes. That was me. And I know that someone calling me an idiot or using the word fundy as some kind of insult would not have helped me to get rid of my young Earth creationism.
Right. Yeah. That, without getting too much into the topic, that may be why I'm an agnostic, because I find atheists a little too you stupid religious person, insert insult here. I find both stances too militant, and that's why I end up on the fence in so many situations in life, especially politics.
Yeah, I I have similar criticisms for a lot of I guess I could call them activist atheists. they're not just people who are atheists. They're people who are in this sort of
Activist is a much better word.
yeah. The thing is, some of their goals,
They're
I'm
in
like,
that community. They're in that community, but they're not representative of it. Sorry, didn't mean to
right,
cut you off.
yeah, no, and some of the goals of atheist activism, like, okay, it's fine to promote ideas like secular government or science education or the normalizing of atheism so that people don't think of atheists as weird, horrible monsters. I'm all for some of these. Like that. That's great. That go 100% get that done. But on the other hand, a lot of their tactics, I think, come across as just being jerks. And it's like, why would anyone want to join a community where it seems like the most prominent members are just mean to people for no particularly good reason? And yeah, I mean, you come across the same thing in, I mean, all segments of the society, I guess. I mean, I know people who do similarly pointless and mean things in politics, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's I to respond to someone in the chat. No, I'm not on the fence regarding a deity because of people's attitudes. I'm on the fence of belonging to any particular camp because of
Yeah.
people's attitudes. I don't like tribalism is all.
Yeah, there's something to be said for separating out your association with certain communities and your stance on certain topics.
Hmm.
So, for instance, there are communities of people who broadly agree with me, either theologically or politically or whatever, that I choose not to associate myself with because I don't like certain aspects of that community. And so I think there is a difference between saying, oh, this is my philosophical stance on the question of God versus am I a member of this, community?
Right. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I think we're starting to enter that era of people realizing they don't really want to be in those tribes, but they can still talk about these subjects without being in those tribes.
I hope so, because I think, like, just taking atheism as an example, believing there isn't a God, I don't think should be the thing that defines, say, like, your politics or your stance on moral philosophy, things like this. And it seems like there are lots of groups that are trying to make it that way. And, like, there are a lot of people who are like, oh, if you want to be a real atheist, you got to be politically left wing. I was like, no, you don't. Well, you can be. That's fine.
Hmm.
But you don't have to be. There are conservative or libertarian ideas and principles that don't require you to believe in God.
Mm. I always found that one very strange because I was brought up around a lot of conservative thinking people, and a lot of them didn't believe in God, or
Yeah.
they'd be the kind of people who don't say anything about it, but they don't go to church and they don't think about it, kind of thing. Um,
I also know some very left wing Christians.
yes, at the same time, yeah. There's examples of both on either side, so I've never liked that kind of exclusivism.
Yeah. And I think it's like you said, I think that's starting to change, and I think the internet is helping. But
Absolutely.
yeah. And at this point, I do want to see if the chat actually does have questions, especially about the main topic, which is leaving Young Earth Creationism. Things like, I mean, yeah, it's your questions. So if anyone has any of those, please let us know, and we will try to get to as many as we can. So,
Ugly German and Dark Knight, stop arguing and ask some questions.
but don't stop watching, because I like having
Please.
both of you guys here. You both leave really good comments on my videos, and
Yeah, they're
yeah.
both great. Yeah.
So, do I still ever have doubts one way or the other? Yeah, all the time. There are definitely times when I'm listening to someone on another position, whether it be about science or religion or politics or any of those things. And I think, he's making a decent case, and even though I feel like I have evidence that would counter it, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about that. And that's usually what sparks me to go do extra research and find new things. And sometimes it confirms what I thought. Sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, that's when I tend to change my mind. And just by leaving Young Earth Creationism, I'm the kind of person who is willing to change his mind. So, this is for you, Kevin. What do you think about homeopathy?
Homeopathy. Sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what would you call quote unquote natural medicines, kind of pseudoscience things pushed by
Yeah. So
new agey sort of people.
yeah. So one quick thing is, someone says that they've heard that every geological period can be found in Australia. Yet there are YUCs there who deny the old Earth. Yeah, Australia is actually a great place for geology, and it's still puzzling to me that there are either flat earthers or young Earth creationists in Australia, because Australia does a great job of just wrecking either position. But so do you know a whole lot about homeopathy?
I mean, I've looked into a few specific kind of quack medicines that are out there, but in general, I just sort of regard it as the modern day equivalent of the guy who would sell you a bottle of piss and ink and tell you it's magic elixir.
So to a certain extent, yeah, that's true. So homeopathy, it started back in, I think, the century with a man named Samuel Hahnemann. And his idea was that the medicine that doctors at the time were giving people was just making them worse, which he was right about. People were mixing up things like belladonna and mercury into a paste and like having people eat it. I mean, it was just terrible.
Hmm.
So he had this idea that I'll give people small doses of very dilute substances that I think will help them. And it turns out he had a better success rate because he wasn't actively killing people. He wasn't treating them. He just wasn't actively hurting them like the rest of the doctors.
Okay.
And so his idea was that your immune system sometimes needs to be stimulated in order to respond to whatever disease you have. And what would stimulate it is something that in a normal healthy person, would cause symptoms similar to what you were suffering. So for instance, if you had a cold and there was a lot of sneezing, he might say, well, we'll dilute black pepper because when people sniff black pepper, it makes them sneeze. So we'll dilute that, and it'll stimulate your immune system to respond by realizing, there's sneezing going on. But the amounts that he diluted things were to the point where is essentially none of the active ingredient left. It's just water that he's giving you. Because, he didn't know, but now we know that chemicals are discrete. They come in a certain whole number of molecules. And he thought that these things were continuous. You could continue to subdivide them all the way. He wasn't an anatomist. And so that's just not true. And yeah, homeopathy has never been shown to do anything other than be a very good placebo, which it is a very good placebo. I'll give it that.
Is it still popular?
It's especially popular in certain places. It's fairly popular in the parts of the UK. It's not widely understood in the United States, and so homeopathic remedies kind of fly under the radar there, where people think they're actually getting normal medicine, but they're not. It's more open in the UK. I think was a. Will I ever do anything on anti-vax? So, I have trouble doing a lot of medical stuff because I get very, very angry. It's really hard.
That's fair.
So, and God's auditor, it killed my mom in 2017 because she had cancer treatment. Yeah, that's why I get angry about medical. That's why I have a hard time covering it, because of things like that. Because you know what? If you go through your whole life thinking the Earth is 6,000 years old and that humans rode dinosaurs, whatever. I mean, you shouldn't. It's stupid, but it's not going to kill you. But if you avoid life-saving cancer treatments because someone convinced you that a sugar pill with magic water on it was going to cure your cancer, yeah, I'm actually going to get upset talking about it. So probably not. No, I probably won't cover it because I can't even describe it without getting angry.
It's understandable. Yeah. I've thought about it as well, and that's been the primary kind of barrier to it as well, is it just makes me angry because it most frequently results in sick or dead children, and that's awful.
Yeah. I'm glad that people like Jeff Holiday and Miles Power can do it without just exploding into fits of rage, because it's what I would do. It's honestly hard for me to even describe why I don't talk about it, because I can currently feel my temper rising. because that is just some of the worst things that you can do is mislead someone about their medical, just about their health. Like, what? It's true. What do you have if not your health?
Yeah,
Would you rather be healthy and poor, or just rich but physically a wreck? I'd rather be healthy and poor.
absolutely.
Because I mean, fancy clothes and food aren't going to do much if you're in constant pain and dying.
I see that Kent Hovind is in the chat, and he would like us to prove that the past people lived to 6,000. What?
Thanks for
That's
showing
great.
up, Kent Hovind. Are you the Kent Hovind that likes to go onto Kent's channels and like troll people with an over-the-top version of Kent Hovind? Because I hope you are, because I know there is one of those. It's why his channel name is Kent Hovind Official in all caps.
Oh, that's great.
It's because there are trolls that go by Kent Hovind. Which I find hilarious, honestly. One of them fooled me because it had Kent Hovind's picture. And I was like, wait, is this actually Kent Hovind? Because he was saying things that are over the top even for Kent. And I was just... Yep, one of them caught me.
It's a beautiful world we live in, where these parody accounts exist, and you do have to look twice.
Oh, someone wants me to say water. The Earth was covered in water.
In water.
Water. You have to very heavily emphasize that T. It has to be aspirated. Water, not water.
Water.
Not water. It's not water. Water.
Water. Let's see. I think the best Kent Hovind I can do is hang on. But you're telling me that in some way or another, a pineapple and an elephant are related.
Oh man, that actually that's the only piece of non-sec merch that I have is the Pine Trees Don't Produce Elephants T-shirt. I have it.
That's great.
I have it in blue. It's yeah. Isn't that illegal to impersonate? What, Kent Hovind? Oh, is it in? So actually, I think the laws about impersonating other people are going to depend on jurisdiction, and I'm not sure how legal it is to go around impersonating people.
I think he'd be in trouble if he were selling something under Kent's name.
So yeah, that might be. Beach Price says, or is it Beach or BJ? I don't know. Says, do you ever do presentations on more recent animals like myocytes? So I do actually have something on modern whales in my video catalog. I believe it's called A Whale's Tale, Tale, of Evo Devo. And in talking about dinosaurs, I do often get into modern birds, so modern dinosaurs. There have been things where I'm thinking about like maybe I'll do something about like the evolution of snakes, much of which happened fairly recently. And as far as Kent Hovind, people, here's how you know that people live 6,000 years. I've been around for 150 or so million years. So
yeah, there you go.
If I can do it, then humans can do it.
We've got a Jurassic era dinosaur and an immortal head in a jar here. What do you want?
Yeah, exactly. Unidentified Levine says, do you know about Dr. James Tour? The name is familiar. I really feel like I've heard the name, but I can't think of what he's done. So if you remind me, I might remember, or it might be that I'm just mistaken and feeling like I've heard the name. So
I have a quick question for myself to you.
Okay.
Just because you're clearly much more knowledgeable about dinosaurs than I am. I was watching a video recently of a cassowary, and I was watching the way it ran, and I thought to myself, God, that looks like a dinosaur. Is there some sort of ancestor dinosaur that's in any way recognizable that led to the cassowary?
So it depends on to what degree you mean led to the cassowary. So all birds had a flying bird ancestor. So first, I like to define birds as a crown group containing the most recent common ancestor of paleognathe and neognathe birds and all of its descendants. There are people who disagree with me on this definition. It doesn't matter as far as the actual animals go. but I like to keep crown group definitions from modern taxa. It's just a preference. So with that definition, all birds would share a common ancestor who was probably a two-winged flighted bird with a beak. And so the cassowary would have more immediately descended from something that probably looked more like a more traditional bird that you might see. But because it has become very large and ground-based, it has reverted to a more primitive lifestyle. But if you want to see dinosaurs that are morphologically similar to a cassowary, you can look at things like Caudipteryx zui, which actually is in the thumbnail to my most recent upload, which was audio remaster of my debate. But I might actually be able to pull up the image, put it on screen. So give me a second. See if I can't find it and put it on screen. Where would I have put it? Probably pictures. So, and actually, the picture also has a cassowary. So, yeah, if you look there, there is a cassowary and a Caudipteryx.
Is it on the stream?
Yes, it is.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, so I contrasted these two because they're both fairly similar morphologically. So Caudipteryx is a very bird-like non-bird, and the cassowary is a very primitive dinosaur-like bird that is a dinosaur. So that's why I contrasted them, because they're already very similar to each other in terms of just sort of overall build and most likely to some degree behavior.
Right. So not in any way related in terms of direct ancestry line, but...
Yeah. Caudipteryx definitely is not a direct ancestor to the cassowary. But Ugly German Truth asks, would it be one ancestor or a group of 2 or 3 closely related dino birds? Could you clarify the question? I'm not exactly sure what you mean. Why haven't we bred giant dino chickens yet? So we probably could at this point, honestly. Like, it probably wouldn't be outside the realm of something we could do, but there are questions about the ethics of meddling with an animal's genetics in ways that might cause significant amounts of suffering, as well as there are concerns about what might happen if wild instances of these dino chicken escaped. And there are also legal matters. It is illegal in many countries to allow embryos that have been genetically modified in unapproved ways to actually come to term. So, all right, bye, Bent. Thank you for stopping by.
Bye, Ben.
We have created chickens with various primitive features, including teeth and a more traditionally archosaur-like snout in embryo, but they were terminated before being allowed to hatch. Because of things
I bet even that was kind of ethically controversial.
It was controversial, but it wasn't quite illegal. So, yeah.
Interesting. So we basically have laws in place preventing Jurassic Park.
Currently, yes, in most places. That's not true everywhere. There are places where you can get away with a little bit more.
Interesting. 'Cause I did know about that. The chicken that was bred with teeth and was it like a snout that was more?
Yeah, it was. So the weird thing about bird snouts is that they're basically all premaxilla, and they tend to have fairly narrow premaxillae. But you can switch on and off a few different regulatory genes in a bird, and it will develop a more traditionally archosaur cranium, where the maxilla dominates most of the upper jaw, and then the premaxilla is only about the front quarter to a third or so. And it also will end up being broader, more like an alligator than, say, most birds. So,
interesting.
Yeah, it's I don't know all the details of the genetics because I'm not super great on the nitty-gritty of genetics. Although I know enough to know that Georgia Purdom is speaking nonsense most of the time. So there's that. Let's see. Are there any laws against Matrix Apocalypse or Skynet? Actually, I don't think there are. So
I think there should be.
Right?
It might be an area that we need to start looking into at this point.
Oh, here's an interesting one. Humans have an ethical responsibility to genetically resurrect animals that they have directly driven to extinction.
Directly. That's an interesting
Yeah.
caveat.
So I am hesitant to put moral obligations on people who have not caused moral harms. So generally, I don't think that people who didn't themselves contribute directly to driving a species extinct would have any obligation. So, like, for instance, um,
So if we brought back like the bison or the dodo,
I so no one currently alive was involved in, say, hunting the dodo to extinction.
right?
I don't think any currently living person has any ethical responsibility to do so. I think it might be nice because I make a distinction between morally obligatory and morally praiseworthy. Some things are good things to do, even if you don't have to do them. Some things you have to do in order to be moral. So, for instance, you have to avoid murdering people in order to be moral. Every
Right.
time you murder someone, you've done something bad.
Every time.
Every time, every single time. But on the other hand, I think it might be morally praiseworthy to bring back some of these species, especially in environments that are obviously suffering from their loss.
Mm.
I don't think it's a moral obligation. Except maybe if it happened extremely recently, you might be able to say that the people who directly caused it might have a moral obligation, but it would be nearly impossible to impose them meeting that obligation because, generally speaking, the people who make things extinct tend not to be the kinds of people who could bring them back.
So then in that case, I guess we should probably say it may be worth trying to bring back the white rhino or in the next few years, possibly bees.
Well, actually, so European honeybees have mostly bounced back.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, so it turns
I've
out
been
that,
hearing a bit of good news around the world about it.
yeah, well, one of the things is it turns out that honeybees are valuable. People make money off of them. And
Hmm.
it's not that hard to make one hive into 4 or 5 hives. Because if you take, so, beekeepers keep their honeybees structures where they have combs that they can slide in and out of the structure vertically. Well, if you take one of those,
Sorry, I was muted there. Sorry.
oh no, it's all right. If you take one of these combs out, and you move it to another hive that's far enough away, the bees will consider themselves in a situation where they're in a hive without a queen, and they'll simply start feeding actually several of the developing larvae royal jelly, at which point several queens will emerge. They'll kill each other until there's only one left, and now a new hive will be established.
Wow.
So it's actually, yeah, it's very easy to create a new hive. And then, of course, after the new queen establishes that she's the only queen left, she'll go on a nuptial flight, come back, start producing fertilized eggs to continue on the hive. So it's actually pretty hard to drive bees to extinction while there are people taking care of them. It's kind of like, how would you drive chickens to extinction?
Right.
Even
Yeah.
if you pumped all sorts of stuff that was especially toxic to chickens into the atmosphere, I mean, chickens are too valuable. People are going to figure out how to keep them around. Uh, the bees were never really in danger of extinction. Apis mellifera, possibly, but not bees in general. It's true, actually. A lot of the non-honeybees that were out there were also not being seriously threatened. There are, however, species of bees that are very much endangered. Like they're one of the main pollinators on the Hawaiian Islands is a native bee that's almost completely gone. So, I mean, there are bees around the world that are in trouble. John Rapp, I've just subbed. Thank you very much, John. And thanks to Kevin, because I think he came from you. I'm
Thanks,
a
John.
Raptor at first, so not Tapper in a baseball cap. Look forward to content. Thank you. I'm having fun. Yeah. So someone was talking about abiogenesis. So one of the things about abiogenesis is it's not very well understood compared to most other aspects of the history.
Hmm.
It's there are certain hypotheses, some of which may be concordant with each other, some of which may be opposed, and many of which may be true to varying degrees. But we have certain ideas about how complex chemistry can arise without needing life. RNA can synthesize its own replication from amino acids. There's some indication that dextro amino acids are actually more stable than their chiral counterparts, so that can help explain the sort of single-handedness of amino acids used in life. We can create certain protocell-like structures where these things are not alive, but they do have a metabolism, and they can move to seek out additional sources of energy. So we can make things that aren't cells, but they eat and they metabolize. So we're making progress, but it's still very much a young science. And it may be that we never actually answer the question, how did life on Earth arise in particular? We may have ideas about how life can arise, but that doesn't necessarily mean we'll know how it did arise in any given place in particular. We ever address astronomy evidence against YEC? I asked because that's what made me leave YEC behind. My first live stream with Landon Kurt Knoll, I believe it was called Interview with a Genius. We talk a lot about some of the reasons why modern astronomy cannot really be fit into a young Earth narrative. Also, we got into that on my 1,000 subscriber live stream. And I also have a video called Answers to Jason Lyle or something like that, where some of the things that he goes over are astronomy based. I have some responses to some of that, although most of what he says is sort of a more general, broad philosophical thing. But he did a video called, I think, 10 questions to ask an evolutionist or something. So I answered them. So I have, in fact, addressed a lot of astronomy stuff. Check out those videos. So 1,000 subscriber special, Interview with a Genius, and Answers for Dr. Jason Lyle or for Jason Lyle or something like that.
And I would just like to point out, incidentally, every piece of evidence regarding astronomy that can be... I meant to tag John Rapp. I'm sorry, John Auditor, or God's Auditor. Every piece of astronomy evidence that can be used against YEC can also be used against Flat Earth.
I would say, yeah, at least for astronomy.
Well, the thing I've been considering lately, like a kind of kill-all for Flat Earth to me, is as long as the speed of light is a verifiable fact, everything we know in space is more or less correct. We know, for instance, that the moon is 238,000 miles away because we can bounce a laser off it, and it takes 1.3 seconds to get there.
Yeah.
And so that kills any kind of notion of a local moon or a firmament.
Right. It really does. Oh, and Unidentified Leviathan cleared up about Dr. James Tour just bluntly told everyone was being done in labs is not abiogenesis. I do believe I saw some of that video. I would agree with him that nothing that's being done in any of the labs is abiogenesis. But that's because for it to be abiogenesis, you would have to end up with a new life that was composed of previous non-living things that didn't have any living ancestors. But the thing is that none of the things that anyone is doing in labs is trying to actually perform an act of abiogenesis, because we don't have enough knowledge about how we could go about doing those things. What all of these are doing is putting in place elements of what could have helped abiogenesis on the way. So it's sort of like saying, if, say, you have... It's like saying, you know what? No one in any of the labs is curing cancer right now. Well, okay, but we're working on treatments for it, and it may not even be a thing that we can do, but that doesn't mean that they're not actually doing good research on the topic and that we're not making progress.
Right.
Which we are.
That's something I kind of realized a long time ago. Once you kind of break down what cancer is, it may not necessarily be curable, but there's no reason to not treat it to 99.9% effectiveness.
Yeah. And Darth Killer says, any chemistry denier to suggest besides Peter and Pete? I'm actually not very well plugged into the world of chemistry denial. I know I saw something about water isn't actually H2O that didn't make any sense, because it was someone talking about like how if you took like flasks of hydrogen and a flask of oxygen from Amazon.com or something and you combine them, like their weight didn't match up to the expected weight of that volume of water or something. And it just made no sense. I don't know who that was, but yeah, it's it's not an area of pseudoscience that I travel in a lot, so I don't have any recommendations there. Unidentified Leviathan said its claim that they're making is abiogenesis. I don't think it is that's what they're claiming. I think it's that journalists like to claim that what scientists are doing is far more sensational than it really is. Like, I remember seeing some headline about something like saying, "Oh, scientists say that this black hole is getting hungrier." No, they don't. That doesn't even make sense. Makes a good headline though.
That happens a lot with science. Like when it was realized properly about the geocorona, the little bits of particulate matter of the atmosphere that extend all the way out past the moon.
Oh yeah.
And the headlines were just, "The moon is in Earth's
Oh
atmosphere."
gosh.
It was like, well, kind of.
And the thing is that normally that kind of particulate matter, because those follow they follow parabolic trajectories, that they're not in a fluid. They're individual atoms and molecules following parabolic trajectories, going back towards Earth after having been kicked up by something. That would normally be described as an exosphere, not an atmosphere. Like the moon has an exosphere. It has little particles that would normally be gas that are following parabolic trajectories above its surface after being hit by, say, a high energy photon or something. But it's not a fluid. It doesn't flow. It doesn't have any viscosity. It's just individual particles going on their little happy gravity dictated path.
Right. I think it's just that's what's hard to describe to people is like, that's why they do it, right? They simplify these things so that people don't have to think about, well, it's not exactly an atmosphere, it doesn't function like an atmosphere, but for all intents and purposes it kind of is. It's hard to find a way to effectively deliver the information without misinforming people.
Yeah.
Like I think another kind of similar example would be like the thermosphere itself. People don't understand the thermosphere. They think it's very hot up there. Well, it's not. It has a high temperature, but it has heat.
Right. It's so thin that there's not much thermal energy that it could transfer to you.
Right.
So, yeah. And it also has an extremely low coefficient for heat transfer anyway, because it's so thin. Because, I mean, the particles strike you so infrequently that they can't transfer much of their kinetic energy to the particles that make you up, or a spaceship up, or whatever. So, see if we have any other... What comes next? Clouds are not water? Marcus Dresden, you're behind the times. That's the entire point of chemtrails. That clouds aren't water.
Oh yeah, man. All clouds are the weather machine made by the man.
Yeah, and contrails, which are in fact just clouds made of water that happen to have been produced in an unusual way, they'll say that, oh no, it's like aluminum particulates. And my favorite thing is just like, okay, then find me a higher than normal rate of aluminum particulates. And I've actually known of instances where chemtrailers went out and did tests for aluminum, and they were like, oh look, this surface sample has aluminum. It's like, well, it has the expected aluminum for a surface sample from the crust of the Earth, which is to say, a bit. Not a whole lot. Did you say try to check maybe lower layers of soil to see if there was significantly lower amounts of aluminum? Or did you try to, say, check random samples from areas that don't have lots of air traffic to see if they had significantly lower amounts of aluminum? And the answer is always just no.
Yeah, of course.
They went to a lab with some dirt. They said, hey, what's in this? The lab told them, and one of the answers was aluminum. So they said, aha!
That's brilliant. God's Auditor was asking about HARP. Are you familiar with HARP at all?
I don't remember what it stands for, but it's supposed to be a weather modification project, isn't it?
High Altitude Auroral Research Program, I think is what it stands for.
Oh.
But yeah, they think it's a weather control program, and it's actually just to study the aurora.
Yeah, there's stuff like that, like the Flat Earthers with the Antarctic Treaty. It's like, have you ever read it? It doesn't say any of this stuff.
Right. And I will say about HARP, the greatest thing about it, God's Auditor, look this up. There was a show on TV briefly called Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura. Starring the actor and wrestler and politician Jesse Ventura. Yes, see, Bob Knob knows all about it. And he went to HARP and he was circling around in his helicopter talking about how he called like 6 times trying to get permission to go in and they wouldn't let him. So he lands the helicopter outside of the place and is shocked when an armed guard tells him he can't come in.
You don't say. And also, John Raff says chemtrails, homeopathy for the environment. Yes, definitely.
Nice.
That's great. Yeah, that's the HARP conspiracy is a strange one. Let's see. Birds are dinosaurs. Finally, should we change wild animals? Would that destroy ecosystems or help them? CRISPR has the ability to change the course of evolution forever. Scientists really change. I'll be honest. I haven't wrestled with that question too much. It's one of those things where it's like I can see the benefits, but I'm a big fan of. So there's this concept in economics called the seen and the unseen, right? So the seen are the obvious, immediate, direct effects of whatever policy you have in place. The unseen are all the hidden effects that either you have missed out on because the policy was put in place, but they would have happened if it weren't, or that are simply less obvious to you. And so I don't know what the unseen effects of releasing genetically altered organisms into the environment would be in most cases. I don't think it would be as catastrophic as a lot of the anti-GMO alarmists are going to talk about, but I think it's one of those things where we should definitely be very confident we know exactly what changes have occurred in a genome and what that means before releasing an intentionally genetically modified organism into the environment. Expanding Earth, yeah, that's a thing. You heard about the expanding Earth?
Yes. Yeah, there's every kind of conspiracy that regards the general shape or nature of the Earth. I always link back to flat Earth because I can debunk it in the same ways. We know what the Earth looks like. Let's stop pretending it's something else.
Yeah. Birch Dinosaurs asks, so CRISPR can create extinct animals, right? CRISPR could create sort of facsimiles of extinct animals. Like you could take an Indian elephant, which is the closest relative of, say, a woolly mammoth that's still around, and you could genetically engineer it to look and act a bit like a woolly mammoth, and perhaps even be able to survive in the same environments that woolly mammoths would have thrived in. But it will not actually have the same gene, or especially not the same genetic variability as the original. So it's not quite bringing back an extinct animal, although in terms of environmental impact, it might be good enough. And there's actually some scientists working on ways where they could actually simply genetically engineer some elephants to just be mammoth facsimiles without actually needing mammoth genetic material.
My brain went the like cheap movie route while you're describing that, and I was imagining some scientists taking an elephant up to the Arctic and like gluing horsehair onto it.
Nice. Yeah, I don't think that would be heritable though.
No.
So, how about brains with 5G? Oh yeah, the 5G is going to kill us all. Conspiracy.
There's a lot of 5G fear.
Yeah. So here's the thing. 5G is, from what I understand, it's basically just a higher frequency network, and because of the higher frequency, it has more bandwidth. But the there's never been any evidence that this particular form of radiation is particularly harmful to people. Because the thing is, like radio waves, microwaves, and all of these are just different kinds of electromagnetic radiation, and there are a lot of parts of the spectrum that just aren't very harmful. You have to get into the pretty darn small, small in terms of wavelength sections of the electromagnetic spectrum before it starts really becoming a problem.
Mm.
So, like ultraviolet and higher energy, aka smaller wavelength, that starts to become a problem. But as far as I know, 5G is still well below even the visible range, even the infrared range.
Oh yeah.
So I don't see why it would cause any problems. There's no immediate physical reason to think it's a problem. And as far as what does Dapper Dino know about radiation and the risks thereof? Well, I went to Naval Nuclear Propulsion School where radiation controls and ionizing radiations were big topics that we had to pass lots of tests on. So
that's pretty credible, I would say.
Yeah. I did a lot of radiation control in my time in the Navy. A lot. much more than I wanted to, but um,
I like what God's auditor said. 5G is basically just a large Wi-Fi router.
yeah, basically, yeah, it really is. There's just no reason to suspect that it's.
No, that kind of feeds into all those like Project Bluebeam style conspiracies. If you've ever heard any of those that all involve an impending event that's totally going to happen, like next year probably,
Right.
in which either the world ends or the New World Order takes over, and things like 5G and chemtrails and all that stuff, it ends up kind of feeding into that as pieces of the big puzzle of the grand unified conspiracy.
And Unidentified Leviathan asks if I was in the Navy. Yes, I was in fact the first dinosaur in the United States Navy, but they weren't talking a whole lot about it because there's still some sort of anti-dinosaur in the armed forces sentiment out there.
That's why in the recent Jurassic World movies, that's why that's a plot element. It's a kind of subtle whistle about that.
Exactly. Yeah. But they're still not giving me any credit or residuals or anything from that, which is it bugs me. But technically, there's not much I can do about it.
Little known fact: the Rex throughout the Jurassic Park movies was originally Dapper Dino.
Yeah, it was going to be me, but I wasn't big enough or scary enough, so they had her do it.
Ooh, a little T-Rex with a horn on its head, not good enough.
And yeah, cell phones are going to give us brain cancer. Yeah, that was again all of the wavelengths used by cell phones are not ones that are going to be dangerous. Like it's not any more dangerous than sitting near a radio tower.
Right.
Yeah, God's Auditor was in Digent, not sure, and later at U.S. Space Command, and they worked with cutting edge stuff. Yeah, and they weren't worried about 5G. It's just a refinement of older technology. Yeah, it really is. Fear of 5. This is Darth Killer. Fear of 5G were there long before. I remember during the era of 2G rumors and fake news articles claiming that the waves were going to make ear hair overgrow. Awesome. So Bob Knob says that Laura, who I think might be his wife, I believe, if I remember correctly, says your neck doesn't work in any biological sense. She's probably on the drugs again. So actually, that neck is fairly carefully reconstructed, keeping in mind the actual muscles inside of a dinosaur's neck as well as the bone structure. And it's the rig that I use to pose and animate isn't super perfect, but broadly speaking, the neck is about what you would see on a real Ceratosaurus if you saw one alive. So there's that. If we went to a large planet, this birds are dinosaurs facts. How would we prepare or live on or around them?
Well, see, you've kind of asked a vague question there. What do you mean by large? Do you mean massive, or do you mean
he contrasts
big?
it with low G, so I'm going to assume he means high G.
Okay, so massive then. So
Yeah.
more massive than Earth. That's an interesting question.
I mean, I think there's probably humans don't really have any experience with significantly higher G forces than one in terms of just living long term. Obviously, we have experiences with like pilots pulling high G maneuvers and stuff like that, but that's not a long term. But I imagine there must be some range of values for a gravitational constant higher than what would give you 1G, and also a bit lower, where humans could essentially function normally.
You know what? This makes me think I should look into the Soviets did a few landings on Venus at a certain period in time, and I wonder if they did any research on like essentially how quickly the gravity was crushing their equipment or anything like that.
Well, from what I understand, it was the heat fried their computers before the gravity was able to cause any problems. And also, I'm not positive, but I think Venus actually has a slightly lower surface gravity than Earth.
What does it?
I think it does. I'm going to double check.
Oh, shoot. I'm making myself look bad here. I'm the space guy. I'm being corrected by a 150 million year old dinosaur.
Venus gravity is 8.87 meters per second.
Ah, shoot.
Yeah, so
just
it's
barely.
It's about a whole meter per second.
Yeah.
So yeah, Venus surface gravity is slightly lower than Earth, but I think it's also one of those things where like, let's say Venus weren't so hellish in other ways, I think humans could probably function normally on that.
Hmm.
I watched your Kent versus Dapper Dinosaur debate, Birds or Dinosaurs. I love how he kept thinking that you were talking about evolution, but you kept telling him, even if God is real, birds are still dinosaurs. And it's true. One of the things about debating someone who has a set script is you have to be able to get them off script. Because if you let them stay on script, they are so practiced and so slick with that script, you will not get in anything useful. Get people off script if you're going to debate someone who has the same script. And there's a lot of creationists who do debates, and they always have the same script. And I've had creationists refuse debates simply because I wanted to narrow in on part of their script, and the debate was going to be so narrow that they couldn't use the rest of it, and they knew it. I once asked someone whose big thing is, genetic entropy. That's, information is always degrading in the genome. And I said, well, let's have a debate specifically about, can mutations lead to an increase in genetic information? Refused. Wouldn't debate that. Because he knows, okay, I'm projecting my own motive, or I'm projecting ideas about his motivation. I can't say for certain. But I'm fairly confident the reason that he refused is because he knows that he cannot defend that point on its own. He can only use it as part of a Gish Gallop with a whole bunch of other things. Are you familiar with the Gish Gallop?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Flat Earthers love it.
Did you know that it came from Young Earth Creationism?
I didn't.
Yeah, Dwayne T. Gish. He is co-author on the book, or I guess he still is the co-author, but he's dead now. The Genesis Flood. And I think he worked for Creation Research Institute. But yeah, he would do public debates where he would just rattle off, like, just so many various points, all of which he was incorrect about, but about which no debater could possibly correct all of them satisfactorily in the allotted time. And yeah, it was named for Dwayne T. Gish.
It's a horribly kind of effective way of making your point. Like you see something like Eric Dubay's 200 proofs that the Earth is flat.
Oh yeah,
and it's one after another, and they're all wrong.
And half of them are the
just
same as previous points, just stated differently or with a different example.
Oh yeah. When you boil it down, it's really like, I think 60 points.
Yeah. So Maya asks, "Are you saying creationists are dishonest?" I am, and then Unidentified Leviathan, being a creationist, said, "Would I be dishonest?" So first, Unidentified Leviathan, I don't think you are dishonest, and I don't think that most creationists are dishonest. The ones who are, though, are the ones who have some decent credentials, who have been involved professionally in promoting creationism for any significant length of time. They have been exposed to the information that shows that their ideas are incorrect. They choose to ignore that. And I would say that is dishonest. But I don't think, I wasn't dishonest when I was younger. I mean, I'm not saying I was, some paragon of truthfulness. People tell lies. I'm sure I told plenty of lies when I was a kid, all through high school or whatever. But I honestly held those creationist beliefs. But that was because I hadn't actually been exposed to the counter evidence. And when I was, I did the honest thing and modified my belief. Darth says,
can I just say,
oh yeah,
when it comes to Unidentified Leviathan, I didn't know that they were creationists, but I've been noticing them in the chat, and earlier they said with asterisks around it, laughs in Spinosaurus, and that made me chuckle. So I like this person.
Yeah, I like Unidentified Leviathan too. He's been hanging out on my channel basically since the Kent Hovind debate, and I appreciate him being here and putting in comments and in the chat. Good guy. Creationists, this is Darth Killer. Creationists do bring up things sometimes. Hear the identification of. So yeah, actually, there have been times when creationists have brought up interesting things, and that's one of the reasons that a lot of my videos are less a debunking of a specific video and more using a misunderstanding that's common in creationism as a jumping off point to educate about a particular topic. So, for instance, I previously mentioned my video, A Whale's Tale of Evo Devo. I did that because I wanted to do a video about evolutionary developmental biology. And I used Kent Hovind's abysmal understanding of whale anatomy to be a jumping off point for that. Welcome back, Dark Knight Apologetics. Let's see. Beach Price says, I believe because I was supposed to believe to belong in church. Never questioned it. Yeah, that's pretty common too. And I think that's an honest stance, is everyone says that this is what you're supposed to believe. You take these people as authority figures, and so you simply accept that that is probably true. Yeah, like what Tony Reed used to do from Ugly German Truths. Yeah, basically. I like Tony Reed's format where he saying, hey, creationists say this thing, but what is actually the case? What's really going on? Launches into discussion about the actual science behind whatever this creationist misunderstanding. I obviously don't use his exact format, but it's a similar kind of idea. I'm not seeing too many questions. Do you have any? We're getting close to the closeout time for the stream, I think.
Geez, not offhand. Since I can't think of anything to say, I'm just gonna say, I wish Bill was here, and may he rest in peace, because I wish he was here, because this would have been such a more amazing stream with him. But
I agree.
Here I am babbling on like an idiot instead.
And so I did notice from Bill's own Twitter that there is apparently a GoFundMe to help offset the cost of final costs about funerals and things like that. So this is from Bill's Twitter that I got this, so I'm fairly confident that this is actually legitimate. So I'm linking it in the chat. I'll put it in the description later. I wanted to see if I could find information about the service at the museum. I'm not finding it on his Twitter. I'm going to double check Facebook and see if it's there, because if so, I'd like to give people information in case they're, sufficiently local. Oh, Bill starts with a B, not an N. Let's see. Yeah, so the same GoFundMe is also on his Facebook page, which is being run by his son right now. Yeah, so here we go. The Arizona Museum of Natural History on October 30th from 6 to 8 p.m. The address is 53 North McDonald Mesa. If you search for Arizona Museum of Natural History, you'll be able to find the address. It's not hard to get to if you're in the area. So it's open to the public. If you want to go and pay your respects to a great science educator and someone who really fought hard against pseudoscience, yeah, that's where you should probably head. And if not, like I said, his son is running his Facebook and his Twitter, so if you have messages of support, that's where I would recommend leaving them. If you have, condolences, anything like that. So, yeah, we lost a great man, and I hope that this does a little something to honor his memory. But we are gonna see y'all later. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe to Kevin's channel here, DeadKennedyInSpace, and my channel too. And you know what? Go look through Bill Ludlow's catalog, because he has some great stuff in there, and his channel is linked in the description. So.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Well, everyone, I'll talk to you later. I'm not sure when the next video will be up, because I haven't really started working on it. But thank you very much, and I will see you all later. So let's say you found a skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.